I don't know the best way to present what I'm about to talk about because I really just have a lot of different thoughts that I really want to culminate together. And if I don't get it out now, I feel like it might be too late when shit might be irreversible in the future. So I just feel like, yeah, I kind of have to just say this now. I don't want to make a heavily edited video essay about it. I don't want to make a podcast episode about it because a lot of that takes a lot of work. And this is just a bunch of thoughts that I have that I really just want to culminate together at once. Anyway, so today we're going to be talking about liberals and liberals in the context of social justice. Many people don't seem to understand the difference between what a liberal is and, say, a leftist is. A liberal is somebody who believes that we can have social justice and social change with the existence of several and varying oppressive social structures, including white supremacy, capitalism, the police state, racism, patriarchy, so on and so forth. A lot of liberals are in favor of social change and progressive movements. But the thing is that liberals like to concede to the very particular social structures that harm people and reinforce the social problems that we face today. So, what is a leftist? A leftist, and I'm referring to a broad school of thought, not necessarily socialism or communism or anarchism. I'm talking about the entire spectrum of left-wing thought here. A leftist believes that social justice cannot be feasible until we meaningfully address these particular social structures in a way that completely eradicates them. And I'm referring to the aforementioned capitalism, white supremacy, racism, the police state, transphobia, all of these particular structures that routinely maintain the status quo through a monopoly on violence. One primary example, and of course, this is particularly relevant to right now, is that liberals believe that we can achieve social justice through the means of the U.S. election. And that, my friends, is where leftists tend to disagree. Not all leftists, of course, disagree with this broader point, but the majority of us do. The majority of leftists believe that we need to do much more than just voting in November once every 4 years. We believe that you gotta do much fucking more than that. I hear sometimes from liberals as a response to this talking point that leftists want to do nothing. It's that if you're not going to be voting, then you're just going to be dropping on the floor and just kind of accepting your fate. However, what we're claiming as leftists here is the opposite. In fact, we're making the claim that by hyper-focusing specifically on the November election in the U.S. political system, that you are limiting the scope of what you can be doing to make things better. Let me tell you something. A lot of liberals like to use this rhetorical talking point that if you criticize the Democratic Party or just liberal thought in general, that you support far-right extremists, you support Donald Trump, you support the Proud Boys, you support the GOP, the Republican Party, the conservative agenda, so on and so forth. But can any liberal tell you what the fucking Seven Mountain Mandate is? Yeah, Project 2025 is a very real threat to democracy, and I'm not trying to minimize that here, but this is something that has been on liberals' radar only recently. Liberals haven't really been worried too much about Project 2025 because Joe Biden won the election. They've all been at motherfucking brunch. A lot of us, in particular, do a lot of volunteering for some of the most vulnerable people in our society. I volunteer for the homeless. I participate in an anti-war vigil every single week with my community. Okay, that is a little bit of a stretch. Sometimes I'm sick and I just can't even get out of bed. But even in those moments where I am sick and I can't get out of bed to attend this vigil, you want to know what I'm thinking about? I'm not thinking about how I don't have to get out of bed and attend this vigil, that I could just relax. I'm usually thinking about how I am privileged in the U.S. Imperial Corps, and the people whom I am going to this vigil in honor of don't have that privilege. Like the hundreds of thousands of Palestinian children. They don't get to, tune out Israel's bombing campaigns. They don't get to just like stay in bed and not experience another genocide. No, they have to live through that every single fucking day. This is a thought exercise that I do whenever I particularly engage in privilege for my own self-interest, whether it is for luxury or for necessity. I do engage in this thought process, and it's not necessarily like a guilt-shaming thing or anything. It's really just to make sure that I recognize that even though I do live in poverty, I do have a wealth of privilege that other people do not have, and that I live in the U.S. Imperial Core, and that my government, in particular, is endorsing this ongoing genocide. It is recognizing this privilege, but it's also questioning authority. It's, if anything, the guilt and shaming goes to authority, not to me. And with what I do have in privilege, I'd like to be able to use that for good and for things that I believe in. And I don't think liberals think this way. I think what happens with liberals is they do either go through kind of like a guilt-shaming period, or they kind of just do things for aesthetics, like allyship with the LGBT community. It's aesthetics. It's to look good on like social media or whatever, when actual solidarity with the LGBT community is super fucking important right now. I've mentioned this in brief before, but I want to talk about it a lot more right now, because this is so maddening that I really, really want to highlight just how hypocritical it is. So when Donald Trump became president in 2016, it was a really fucking terrible time because a lot of right-wingers, and particularly neo-fascists, neo-Nazis, and various aspects of the alt-right were all activated. But weirdly, so were liberals. Liberals heard the populist language of Bernie Sanders and felt activated to engage in what I could call pretty much radical activism. Maybe not like super radical activism, but like for liberals, yeah, pretty radical. Like I saw liberals at anti-ICE protests. I witnessed liberals particularly having abolitionist views for the first time. I actually got to see more liberals interested in not just defunding the police, but also abolishing the police. That like an actual Overton window towards anarchist schools of thought, that kind of discourse was permissible in liberal circles. And I liked that. I liked it because they were actually thinking outside of the box for once. But the problem is that liberals only did this because the president of the United States at the time was Donald Trump. And I really think that that right there poses a serious dilemma for liberals as a whole. And I don't just mean the Democratic Party or like the Democratic Socialists of America. I mean like the whole liberal school of thought. Why should the presence of Donald Trump be the very thing that gets you activated? Why should Donald Trump be the thing that gets you to oppose anti-immigration policies? Hell, why should it get to the point to where fascism is on the horizon or already fucking here? When I talk about anti-immigration policy, I'm talking about how it was a point of contention in liberal circles back in the Trump administration. And it seems like throughout the Biden administration, there is still a huge stink against anti-immigration policies that separate people, including children, from each other's families, and people dying at the border with this increasing mortality rate skyrocketing with no stop in sight. This issue to liberals is disposable, from what it seems. Like at the recent Democratic National Convention, Kamala Harris is super hell-bent on maintaining the fascist state violence that we see at the border. Kamala Harris pretty much has the same stance on the border that George W. Bush did on the border. Hell, Kamala Harris has the same views that like Biden and Donald Trump had on the border. Kamala Harris and even Joe Biden throughout the 2020 presidential campaign tried to outdo Donald Trump in his rhetoric about the border. Meanwhile, the Republican Party, being the right-wing political arm of the American fucking government, is talking about mass deportation of not just undocumented immigrants, but also their own political oppositions. This is because the liberals, and particularly the Democratic Party, has done so much conceding to the Republican demand that the Republicans feel that they could be so emboldened to make these horrifically fascist and Hitlerian declarations. Anytime liberals particularly try to do something that is progressive and they don't get their way, they concede to the fascist side, and they just let them fucking do what they want. They don't challenge them. They don't question authority, for crying out loud. When people criticize like Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or other Democratic Party politicians, they're doing so because those particular politicians are either spineless or they concede to the same kinds of demands that the Republican Party makes. And so the Republican Party feels that they can just keep going off the fucking deep end. Think about it. If the Democratic Party really wanted to maintain popularity with progressive voters, they would do shit like make Medicare for all and abolish private insurance. Yet instead, Joe Biden and all of his Democratic cronies are more specifically focused on reducing the price of medical health care. And liberals will point at that and be like, see? That's progress right there. We did it. You fucking commie. Vote for my favorite white supremacist. If liberals were serious about fighting the actual rise of fascism, they would actually engage in anti-fascist organizing. If liberals were serious about engaging in actual progressive movements, they would embrace abolition. If liberals even gave a damn about the people whom they are trying to recruit for voting, they would actually concede to the demands of things like a fucking ceasefire and stop sending arms to Israel, you fucking moron. It's wild to me how they pretend that they are the moral high ground political party, yet they are funding a genocide. And it's like, there's no reason to. I mean, there never was a reason, but Benjamin Netanyahu, like the guy that the Democratic Party is helping engage in this genocidal campaign, he wants Donald Trump to win. They are helping their political opponent win the fucking election. If Kamala Harris, or even Joe Biden for that matter, stopped sending arms to Israel and enforced some kind of red line, then I will tell you right now, they would for sure win this election. I mean, they're not going to get my vote, and I'm obviously not going to be voting for the Republican Party because I'm not a fucking idiot or a cult follower. But liberals would actually get some actual support that, I don't know, I don't even want to say it would be earned because they've already supported a genocide so far, right? The past 10 fucking months, we've seen a non-stop, unconditional endorsement of the slaughter of Palestinian lives. We've seen U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken leave Israel to go to Egypt and Qatar to talk about a potential ceasefire deal, and then Benjamin Netanyahu hours later states, quote, "We will not accept any proposal that includes ending the war," end quote. You see, that's the point. Liberals are like unserious about the things that they even say. Their whole political ideology is like not a very committed one, which is very ironic considering that there is an uncommitted movement in Michigan that is critiquing the Democratic Party's unconditional support for Israel's slaughter of Palestinian lives. And I mean, what about the thousands of anti-trans bills that have been introduced and some of them passed within the last 4 years under the watch of Joe Biden, with no attempt to stop them anytime soon? The people who stopped those bills from passing were people who called their senators and representatives telling them to veto those bills. It came from grassroots organizing, from the bottom up. To think that leftists are fucking suggesting that liberals who vote on fucking November 2024 to fucking do for the rest of the fucking 4 years. You want Roe versus Wade to be fixed from being overturned? Fucking do something about it, and don't just wait till November, you fucking spineless coward. Like, get active. Activate yourself. Organize your community. Organize, like, dual power structures. Get involved in mutual aid. Get involved in direct action. Educate yourself. Agitate yourself. Get mad about this. Get radical. Organize. Like, fucking do shit. Do something. Any fucking thing, for crying out loud. Oh, like, you know, you care about people in the workforce getting a living wage, or particularly having good working conditions that doesn't screw with their health? Then, like, support your local union, for crying out loud. Like, join the IWW or something. Like, something. You know, like, do a thing, for crying out loud. Don't just say you give a fuck. Don't just pretend you give a fuck. Actually give a fuck, for crying out loud. Liberals are the do-nothing ideology. And quite frankly, I hope that if some liberal listens to this and they waddle into the comment section and they're like, oh, well, then I guess you just want Trump to win, then I want to ask a question. What the fuck have you been doing for the past 4 years? Watching Vosh at Thanksgiving with your neo-Nazi cousin? Oh, and now suddenly you're a member of the DSA and you suddenly want to get involved in activism? Suddenly? All of a sudden? And you're just gonna disappear after November? Well, fucking jeez, fuck you. Maybe, like, learn how the system actually works. Get some, like, materialist analysis of how our system fucking works. Like, these kinds of people, particularly liberals, are the kinds of people who will say that cops deserve to be at Pride because they protect people from, like, hate groups shooting up schools. When, by the way, if they had a materialist understanding of the police monopoly on violence in particular, they would realize that they maintain violence in and of itself within the criminal system. Police don't even solve 2% of crime, statistically speaking, according to the University of Utah of Law in a study conducted in 2020. Like, Pride, like, was a thing because cops were harassing queer and trans people. And let me tell you something. If Trump were to win, hypothetically, and Project 2025 were to become law, are you suddenly going to side with the fascists because that's the fucking law? You might be opposed to it because it's Donald Trump, but what happens when, if, say, for example, another politician takes over and he's like a little less radical in terms of his white nationalist sympathies than Donald Trump? Are you gonna then simp for that motherfucker and you're gonna, like, call him progressive? Even Ronald Reagan on the issue of Israel has told Joe Biden, of all people, to chill the fuck out for his support of the Zionist movement. And if I'm giving credit to Ronald Reagan, the Republican who made the Mulford Act, you know, the Republican-backed gun control of 1968, then you really know that there is something fucking spineless and fishy about the Democratic Party. Whether it is the Republican or the Democratic Party, they are still part of the goddamn establishment. I really hope that whenever I talk about these things, the people come away with the message to question authority. And you should always question authority, especially your favorite white supremacist. And I encourage people to look into abolitionist thought. Abolition is more viable than reformism. All reformism does is that it kind of like reinvents the wheel for the oppressive structures of our society, making it so that these oppressive structures in our society can be more permitted to do these heinous acts, like body cameras on police officers. Yes, we have plenty of evidence of what they are doing when it comes to excessive use of force and police brutality, but the problem is that they cover their cameras, or they turn off their cameras, or they remove their cameras, or like when it comes to dash cam, they pop their fucking hoodie, so you can't see what the police are fucking doing. This is a reformist tactic that has not really done much in the long run in terms of quelling police brutality. But to the liberal, this issue of police brutality and Black Lives Matter is a conditional one. It is disposable to them. And I want people to understand that when it comes to people's lives, it should not be disposable. Black Lives Matter is not disposable. Trans people, we're not disposable. Abortion rights is not disposable. Palestinian lives are not disposable. Abolition, on the other hand, what does that do? It forces people to really reconcile. Why does the structure even exist in the first place when all it is doing is maintaining a state monopoly on violence? And it does so over and over and over again. And every time we see this in action and we call it out, liberals are the first to say, well, you better vote in November. Well, to that I say, I better see you at the next anti-ICE protest after November. I better see you demanding Kamala Harris for a goddamn ceasefire and to stop sending arms to Israel after November. I better see you in the activism space doing better and trying to learn how you can do better, how you could be more of service to the community and to the most vulnerable people in our society after November. I better see you fucking kicking ass after November. And if you're at this point in this video where I've said all this shit and you still think I support Donald Trump, then I really don't know how to reach you. I really do think that you are just of service to like the Proud Boys. You serve Donald Trump, if anything. You serve the fascist cause more than the progressive one. And you should be ashamed. You should be deeply ashamed. It should stir up some kind of moral crisis for you. And for that I say screw you. Screw you. But for the rest of you, solidarity. And thank you for listening to my heated ass rant about how liberals are such hypocrites.